The piece you're listening to is titled Miserere mei Deus and is Latin for Have Mercy on Me, O God. It was composed by Italian composer Gregorio Allegri during the 1630s for exclusive use in the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City. It was forbidden to transcribe or perform this music anywhere else in the world, and doing so was punishable by excommunication. For about 150 years, the composition of this piece remained a closely guarded secret. During 1770, 14-year-old Wolfgang Mozart happened to be visiting Rome. On the 11th of April, he attended a performance at the Sistine Chapel and heard this piece for the very first time. Enchanted by the beautiful performance, Mozart returned home and almost perfectly transcribed the entire 15-minute-long 9-part choral work from memory. That's 9 different melodic lines all at once for 15 minutes straight. He did return to the chapel a second time to make minor corrections, and a few months later he gained fame for his near-flawless reproduction. But Mozart was never punished for producing this unauthorized copy. In fact, he was actually summoned by the Pope himself, who praised him for his feat of musical genius and even awarded him with the chivalric Order of the Golden Spur. A few days ago, I was working on this very video and I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. I tried to pick it up to see who was texting me, but I couldn't because my phone was right there on my desk and I had not received any new messages. But I could have sworn I felt it vibrating in my pocket. It's not the first time this has happened, but this time I wanted to know exactly why it happens. And as it turns out, this makes for a great segment in today's episode. The sensation that your phone is vibrating in your pocket while in reality it is not is aptly known as phantom vibration syndrome. It's a form of tactile hallucination or something known as pareidolia. It's when our brain's amazing ability to perceive patterns gets a bit carried away. For example, rock formations or clouds can sometimes form shapes that we perceive as something more than just random shapes. A crater on Mars or a smiley face. The face of a mountain or a face in the mountain. A scenic photo of some clouds or a bear standing on 2 legs attacking a pig. This is pareidolia, and the brain is constantly scanning the environment in search for familiar patterns. Scientists believe something similar is happening when we experience phantom vibrations, when the fabric of your clothes rub against the skin or when you experience minor muscle contractions. The receptors in your thigh mistake this activity for a vibrating phone, because the brain has learned to associate activity within this specific region to that of a phone receiving a text or a call. It's similar to how people who wear glasses get so accustomed to wearing glasses that when they take them off, it will sometimes feel as if they are still wearing them. There's been a few different studies over the years, but one recent study at a college in the US revealed that up to 90% or 9 out of 10 students experience these phantom vibrations. At the height of the Cold War in 1962, US President John F. Kennedy decided to implement new security measures to prevent unauthorized launches and detonations of nuclear weapons. These security devices were known as Permissive Action Link Controllers, or PAL for short, and they look like something straight out of a James Bond movie. For about 15 years, these devices were believed to function correctly, but as it turns out, this was not the case. You see, the Strategic Air Command saw this extra level of security as more of a hindrance, because if the United States were to be attacked, they would only have moments to launch a counterattack. In their opinion, these PAL devices could potentially cost the lives of millions, as it could take crucial seconds or minutes to input the correct code. So, without telling anyone, the Strategic Air Command configured all locks on these PAL devices to 8 zeros. In fact, the missile launch checklist required you to confirm that the combination was set to only zeros. So for about 15 years, codes to access nuclear weapons in the United States were about as safe as the locks on your luggage. There's a woman in the UK who claims to be able to identify people suffering from Parkinson's disease simply by smelling them. And it's one of those rare cases where truth is actually stranger than fiction because her claims has actually been verified as being true. A team of researchers recruited 12 people, 6 with Parkinson's disease and 6 without. They were all asked to wear a t-shirt for a day and then bring it back. The woman named Joy Milne was then asked to smell each t-shirt to identify who had Parkinson's and who did not. Her accuracy was 11 out of 12. But it gets even stranger. She correctly pinpointed the 6 people suffering from Parkinson's, but also claimed that one of the 6 that didn't suffer from Parkinson's actually had Parkinson's. The subject and the researchers assumed that she was simply wrong. But 8 months later, the subject informed the researchers that he had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So Joy was actually 100% correct, and she could somehow identify this disorder long before any obvious symptoms had begun to appear. Scientists believe that changes in the skin of people with early Parkinson's produces a particular scent linked to the condition. Hopefully, further testing will result in an easy way to identify the disorder at an early stage, as it's quite difficult to do so at the moment. What was so extraordinary about New Year's Eve 1999? I actually want you to guess, so I'll give you a few seconds. If you guessed that we celebrated the beginning of a new millennium, then I'm afraid you are incorrect. The current millennium, known simply as the third millennium, actually began on the 1st of January 2001. That's because there was no year 0. Year 1 BC was immediately followed by the year 180. So because we count years from 1 instead of 0, we offset the entire system, which means the same is true for centuries and decades. But it all depends on how you say it. For example, the 19th century is different from saying the 1800s. The 19th century spans between 1801 and 1900, while the 1800s spans between 1800 and 1899. The same goes for decades. The 200th decade spans between 1991 and 2000, while the 90s spans between 1990 and 1999. Of course, this is the overly pedantic and technically correct application and terminology. In more conventional use, like celebrating a new millennium an entire year too early, people don't really care. And rightly so, it's an outdated and moronic counting system that only seems to cause confusion in the modern age. How many continents will you find on our planet? The answer is most commonly 7. North America, South America, Antarctica, Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. You could also say that there are 5 continents: America, Antarctica, Africa, Eurasia, and Australia. Both answers are correct, as a continent is not defined by any strict criteria, but rather by convention. And thus, by convention, there's technically another continent which is often disregarded. The continent of New Zealand, or rather the continent under New Zealand, because the vast majority of this expansive continental fragment is underwater. It's known as Zealandia, and only 7% is landmass, while 93% remains submerged. It's believed that the entire continent sank after breaking away from Australia between 60 to 85 million years ago. Kind of like a real-life Atlantis. A study from 1999 looked at over 3,000 death certificates where the initials of the deceased produced a positive or negative word. For example, the initials of a name like Peter Isaac Green would spell out pig and would thus be considered negative, while a name like James Oliver Yates would spell out joy and would thus be positive. The study found that men with positive initials lived on average 4.48 years longer, while those with negative initials died 2.8 years younger. Women with positive initials lived on average 3.36 years longer, while those with negative initials saw no difference. While it's unclear why, it's speculated that people with negative initials are a lot more prone to experience childhood bullying because of their name and would thus undergo a lot more stress and anxiety than those with positive initials. This psychological stress or lack thereof will in turn affect a person's life expectancy. When most of us answer the phone, we tend to say hello. It's such a common way to greet people that it's easy to assume that hello must have been around for a very long time. But that's not the case. According to Oxford English Dictionary, the first published use of hello was in 1826. However, at the time it wasn't really used as a greeting, but rather to attract attention. In 1877, with the recent invention of the telephone, Thomas Edison wrote in a letter, "I do not think we shall need a call bell, as hello can be heard 10 to 20 feet away." It wasn't long until hello became the natural and proper way to answer the phone. However, the actual inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, had already proposed the use of the word ahoy as a proper telephone greeting, which did make a lot more sense at the time, as ahoy was a common greeting among sailors. While ahoy didn't really stick around, Bell was so stubborn that for the rest of his life he continued to answer the phone with a stern ahoy. Have you ever looked at a bright light, like the sun for example, and suddenly felt the urge to sneeze? Statistically speaking, about 18 to 30% will say yes, while the rest of you may be a bit confused. It's known as photic sneeze reflex, and scientists don't quite understand why it happens. I am actually one of those 18 to 30%, but in my case it's a bit different. Just looking at a bright light has never triggered the reflex for me, but when I naturally feel the urge to sneeze, like when you have a cold and the sneeze doesn't quite want to come out, it actually helps to look at the light, which then almost immediately allows me to sneeze. I don't know if that's just me, but that's my experience at least. The prevailing theory is that nerve signals gets confused. The optic nerve, which senses vision, and the trigeminal nerve, which among other things senses irritants in your nose and makes you sneeze, lies very close together and could thus have an effect on each other. So the idea is that when you're suddenly exposed to light with high intensity, it accidentally triggers the trigeminal nerve, essentially telling the brain that the sun is inside your nose. Why do we call Bluetooth technology Bluetooth, and why do we use this symbol to represent it? So let's look at the name first. The name Bluetooth is actually a nickname given to the 10th century Danish king Harald Gormson. So the name Bluetooth is just an anglicization of the original Scandinavian spelling and pronunciation, which is blåtand. But why though? That is, why was this particular name chosen for this technology, and why was the king given this nickname to begin with? We're not entirely sure how the king acquired this nickname, but the usual explanation is that he must have had a very bad tooth that appeared blue, because blue could also mean dark, essentially meaning a dark tooth. Now, the reason Bluetooth was chosen as a name for a wireless communications technology is because of what the king accomplished during his reign. He managed to unite many independent Danish tribes into one single kingdom. The implication is that Bluetooth does the same with communications protocols, uniting them into one single universal standard. The Bluetooth symbol was created by combining two characters found in an old Scandinavian runic alphabet. The one to the left is known as Hagal and the one to the right is known as Bjarkan, which are the initials of Harald Blåtand. Äntligen kom min svenska.